Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening, whether it's on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. I almost took a second day off, back to back, just to give myself a nice little 4-day weekend, but there's just a lot of little things here and there to sort of corral into one conversation today, and so I decided, let's just do this. It's actually not unlike trying to run as a Democrat in these tenuous, fractured times. Cat herding, I call it, because if anyone who has multiple cats or has cared for multiple cats will know that it's really hard to get cats to all go in the one direction you need them to go at times, and in unison, at the same time, going the same path at the same pace, et cetera, and so on. Getting on message. It's very, very difficult. And with the Democratic Party, it's almost as difficult. In fact, I think it's maybe even more difficult, because at least with cats, you can rattle the treat bag. You can rattle the treat can or the treat jar, right? They're coming. That doesn't always work with all of the various factions that make up the Democratic Party. And let me add, those who tend to vote Democrat but aren't members of the Democratic Party. I say that because I almost sort of want to start a little bit with the sit-down that happened earlier this week between Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who once sought the nomination for the Democratic Party's presidential bid in 2016, and Joe Rogan, who had been a huge Bernie Sanders supporter until he got, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Disenfranchised or just disenchanted. That's the word. Disenchanted with the Democratic Party altogether. Now, there are those on the right who would tell you it's because of wokeness, it's because of trans rights, blah, blah. Joe Rogan was actually a pretty pro-trans person, and by all measures was a pretty woke person for a while. He also became way more successful since 2016 now than he was back then. And I happen to think that the pocketbook tends to have a lot to do with that. I want to read to you a little bit from Rabbi Suave. Is that how you say his name? Rabbi Suave, Soave, the opinion contributor here with The Hill. And I have no idea who he is. Is there a little bio here at the bottom? Co-host of The Hill's commentary show, Rising, and a senior editor for Reason Magazine. Anyway. So this is apparently a transcription from his podcast episode where he discussed a little bit about the Bernie Sanders-Joe Rogan interview. He said, Senator Bernie Sanders returned to the Joe Rogan podcast yesterday, and what an episode it was. I should point out, by the way, he filed this story on Wednesday. The sit-down, the conversation, the podcast itself aired on Tuesday. And Robbie writes, once upon a time, Sanders had, of course, been Rogan's preferred candidate. The podcasting giant gave the independent left Democrat his endorsement in 2020, an endorsement that many mainstream liberals treated as a drawback at the time, which seems quite insane today, Robbie writes. In fact, some members of the liberal media wanted Sanders to reject the endorsement and distance himself from Rogan due to Rogan's contrarian and independent-minded views on topics like the COVID pandemic, transgenderism, wokeness, and so on. Fast forward to 2025, and Democrats are desperate for their own liberal Joe Rogan, having now had to grapple with the fact that progressivism's knee-jerk reaction of every broadly popular figure who does not fit neatly into a box has left them friendless and at odds with the trajectory of the American cultural life. I don't like that term, American cultural life. What is that supposed to mean exactly? I do. I always take offense when politicians, specifically on the right, talk about American values. That's anti-American. Is it anti-white nationalist? Let's just say it. Okay, finally, I had to break down and look up who this Robbie Sove. We're going to say Sove, S-O-A-V-E. I had to look up who he is. White, male, libertarian, journalist. Okay. Well, I guess that tracks. Okay, let's go back to his little post-Rogan Sanders podcast opining here. Robbie says, so I'm not surprised that this time around, there aren't any Democrats wagging their fingers at Bernie for going on Rogan. Could it be that they'd like to learn from him? there's something to be said for Kamala not going on Rogan. I will say this, Sanders maintains a certain appeal. He's still quite sharp and was able to converse with Rogan definitely on a range of topics despite his advanced age. I will say, however, could someone in Bernie's camp please have grabbed a comb? It was very Bernie-esque if you watch the podcast. Very Bernie-esque. I don't know. To me, it's kind of charming, but still just a brush. Rabbi writes, he's so much more cognitively capable than Joe Biden was that it's frankly embarrassing that the Democratic Party didn't go with this option in 2020. Here I am agreeing with the libertarian white nationalist Rabbi Sov. It's unfair for me to say that. I will, however, always go back to my default opinion when a white libertarian is in the conversation. Especially if a heterosexual white libertarian male, you won the lottery in this country when it comes to the starting line. You drew the best. It's a white privilege, I believe, to be a libertarian. Yes, limited government would be great for you because in almost all of your life, you don't have to overcome marginalization. So you don't see the need for government services to overcome marginalization. All right, back to Sov. That said, he made a number of arguments which, while perfectly well articulated and reasonable sounding, are wrong in my view. Surprising that a libertarian white male journalist can't agree with Bernie Sanders on a range of issues. In fact, Rogan even called one of them out as Sanders was making it. He talks about this early part of the interview focused on the power of billionaires to influence public policy with their dollars, something the progressive left is obsessed with. Here is that part he's talking about.
What it says is, you're a billionaire. You have now the constitutional right, because your money is your freedom of expression, right? So you don't like Bernie Sanders? You can put millions or hundreds of millions of dollars into a campaign and express your view about how terrible Bernie Sanders is,
right.
And you can buy that election, right? That's
right.
Your constitutional right. I think that's probably the worst decision that the Supreme Court has ever made. So what is the result of that decision? The result of that decision, let's take us to where we are today, is that Elon Musk, and I know Elon was on your show, and he's here in Austin, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, and we could talk about Elon, but he spent $270 million to elect Trump as president. Okay, I think that's absurd that any one person.
What's the most someone donated towards the Harris campaign?
They spent a lot of money on Harris as well.
They spent $1.5 billion just
combined
over the course of a couple of months.
You got it. All right, let me talk about it. So
Yeah,
I'm not here
let's
just to
talk
say
about
it's
that.
a Republican. That's my point here.
Right.
Okay.
So it's a little disingenuous what Rogan was trying to make. I get it. Kamala got a lot of money and blew a lot of money. And there's something to be said up for that. But what Bernie was trying to say was that one person being able to influence an election with that kind of largesse is the problem. Not the collective 1.5 billion, because that didn't come from 6 people. I think that's 6, right? 1.5 divided by. It didn't come from 6 people. It came from a lot of people. Whereas 1/6 of what Kamala Harris collected campaign-wise for the entire 107-day campaign, 1/6 of that Trump was able to overcome with just the contribution of one person. That's sort of the argument that Sanders is making about wealth inequality and the impact of wealth on our political process and, of course, our economy too. So Rogan actually sort of quietly makes Bernie's point. Back to Robbie Sove here. Sanders attacked the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which he thinks is pretty much the worst thing that ever happened to our country and the source of all our problems. It's not what he said, but he does dislike Citizens United. A lot of Americans dislike Citizens United, by the way. Set aside for the moment the obvious problem that Sanders is complaining about a Supreme Court decision that allows you to, use your free speech to criticize Bernie Sanders, which to my mind is something that should obviously be permissible in a democracy. Well, yes, but here he is on the Hill.com and Reason Magazine. These are not entities that are owned by Joe Citizen. These are large corporate entities that are lifted up by other large corporate entities, and we all have to use social media platforms to get our message out. And we all know that social media, the right can rightfully complain about this, right? We all know that those who own the social media platforms can control how much of a message even gets out and to whom. They complained about that. Okay, so continues here. He had a bad link. That's why I just sort of paused. He said both parties and their candidates are the recipients of huge sums of money. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one issue that I think a lot of progressives have with the Democratic Party. However, at the same time, this is where I'm both the Bernie guy and also the rational guy who understands that you can't go into a sword fight with a plastic knife. A free plastic knife that was given to you. You can't. And that's the necessary evil. As long as the system is set up so that you have to go in with a blowtorch to fight someone with a blowtorch, well, you best damn well go into that fight with a blowtorch, right? I sometimes question whether or not those who arm Democrats with their own blowtorch, I sometimes question if they actually want Democrats to win that battle to then get the money out of politics. I do. I question it. And we're seeing a little bit of this with the aftermath of the Zohran Mamdani Democratic primary victory. And, well, do I weave into that? Yeah, let me just weave into that. This piece from Dana Rubenstein, Benjamin Oreskey, and Michael Gold at the New York Times filed this 2 days ago. The day after Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani rocked the nation's largest city by becoming the presumptive Democratic mayoral nominee, New York's political leaders declined to formally endorse him, and some donors to former Governor Andrew Cuomo considered coalescing behind Mayor Eric Adams, the embattled Mayor Eric Adams, who is polling below 35%, who was being charged by the Department of Justice until Trump took over and decided, hey, this might work to my advantage to drop those charges. Trump likes to drop charges against people who are obviously guilty of things for his own benefit. In an interview, Scott Reckler, one of the city's biggest landlords, said that in a general election race between Mr. Mamdani, a 33-year-old Democratic socialist, and Mr. Adams, he would put his support and potentially his financial resources behind the scandal-tarred incumbent. Mr. Reckler, who donated $250,000 to a super PAC supporting Mr. Cuomo, expressed hope that the former governor and Mr. Adams, who is running in the general election as an independent, would not split the centrist vote. You want to have leadership that speaks to what New York is, Mr. Reckler said. It's the capital of capitalism. That is speaking to the few and not to the many. Mr. Cuomo, who for months led in Democratic primary polls, continued on Wednesday to leave open the possibility that he would run in November on a third-party line. Polls and conventional political wisdom suggest that such a move would only enhance Mr. Mamdani's chances at the expense of Mr. Adams. Bill Ackman, a hedge fund billionaire, with a B, and supporter of President Trump, who donated $500,000 to Mr. Cuomo's super PAC. Get that, y'all. Bill Ackman, hedge fund billionaire, supporter of Trump, donated $500,000 to Mr. Cuomo's super PAC. Said on social media that he also, quote, may ultimately support and endorse Mr. Adams. The scandal-tarred Mr. Adams. Remember that phrase. But one major donor to Mr. Cuomo's super PAC, the investor Mark Gorton, said he is likely to back Mr. Mamdani, owing to the support that Mamdani had received from Brad Lander, whom Mr. Gorton said he ranked first. I feel like people misunderstood my $250,000 for Cuomo for real enthusiasm, Mr. Gorton, the chairman of Open Plans and Advocacy Group, said in an interview. It was basically, oh, looks like Mr. Cuomo is coming back. We don't want to be shut out. Let's try and get on his good side. Money in politics. I mean, does this not make the argument for getting money out of politics? Back to the Times piece here about the split in New York on how to react to the Mamdani primary victory. Mr. Mamdani ascended in the primary by focusing on affordability, proposing free buses, government-run grocery stores. Clutch your pearls, not government-run grocery stores. Run to your nearest ABC liquor store. Universal child care, heaven forbid, and higher taxes on wealthy individuals, there it is, and corporations, there it is. But his vision for expansive new government programs and a rent freeze on regulated apartments alienated many in the business community. Again, he's not speaking to the few. He's not speaking to the cloud. He's speaking to people and their needs. And last I checked, people get more votes than a corporation. Mr. Mamdani's successful showing comes as Democrats across the country are facing profound questions about their leadership and political strategy. Yes, people or corporations? Where are we going? In Washington, younger lawmakers, a number of them to the left of the establishment, have been clamoring for more influence over the party's direction and calling for it to adopt a more forceful, confrontational style of politics. House Democrats have shown some recent openness to elevating younger progressives, including by selecting one to lead their party's members on a prominent committee. But with Democrats shut out of power in Washington and focused on taking back the House next year, it remains unclear how closely senior lawmakers will embrace Mr. Mamdani as they try to flip battleground districts where his far-left stances might alienate voters. Senator Chuck Schumer, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, New Yorkers who lead Senate and House Democrats, congratulated Mr. Mamdani on Wednesday and said they plan to meet with him, but stopped short of an endorsement. Former President Bill Clinton, who backed Cuomo in the final days of the primary campaign. Why, Bill? Adopted a similar stance. Other leading Democrats began to coalesce behind Mr. Mamdani's campaign, including Representative Gerald Nadler, the venerable Upper West Side legislator, and Rodneyce Richaud Hermelin, an assemblywoman who chairs the Brooklyn Democratic Party and has cultivated close ties to both Mr. Adams and Mr. Cuomo, said, New York City spoke, and we as leaders have to fall in line. Holy smokes. That's refreshing. The people spoke. We're going to listen. Did I just hear that from a prominent Democrat in New York City? But moderate House Democrats, who represent suburban swing district, voiced alarm about Mr. Mamdani's ascension and the repercussions it could have for the National Democratic Party. Two of them, Representative Laura Gillen and Tom Suozzi, both of Long Island, were quick to distance themselves from Mr. Mamdani on Wednesday. Mr. Suozzi, whose district covers a sliver of Queens and who endorsed Mr. Cuomo during the primary, the guy was... said he still had, quote, serious concerns about Mr. Mamdani, while Ms. Gillen, citing defund the police rhetoric, he has since avowed, and his unflinching critiques of Israel called him, quote, the absolute wrong choice for New York City. We'll get into the Israel thing in a little bit. Mr. Adams, for his part, made an unannounced appearance on Fox and Friends, during which he called Mr. Mamdani a snake oil salesman. Well, what would I expect him to do when that's presumably his greatest threat to re-election? Money in politics, y'all. That is, the fact that I weaved from the Rogan Sanders conversation where libertarians opining on it to this in New York City and the influence of money versus votes. I mean, it's chef's kiss. Back in a sec. It's The Ron Show, America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. You can always visit The Ron Show online at ronshowatl.com. That's where all of the past podcast episodes wind up. Show notes, I put them there because I like to cite my sources. I don't like getting called out for, hey, you used this and you didn't. It's all in there. Show notes, ronshowatl.com. Let me go back to Rabbi at the Hill, who's talking about the Rogan Sanders podcast and his belief that it doesn't matter how much money any one individual wants to put on an election, they should be allowed to. That's what the libertarians believe. Both parties and their candidates are the recipients of huge sums of money, Robbie Sove writes. The reason is that the federal government has tremendous power to affect the bottom lines of wealthy people. Yeah, and middle class and poor people too, Robbie. That's why they spend so much, he says. The feds get and do they not get disparate reaction and interaction and influence and than the common person does? Yes, Robbie, that's the problem. The feds get to decide whether to break Meta into a bunch of smaller companies. So, of course, Mark Zuckerberg is going to spend his money to stop that. But the consolidation of corporate power is bad for Main Street America. Man, when Democrats can finally get that messaging right, like I just did in 4 seconds, holy shit, are they going to win some elections? The feds get to decide whether Amazon, the most efficient engine of meeting human need ever devised, gets hampered by costly regulation. He's speaking, of course, about workplace conditions that aren't squalor or third world or, triple-digit heat and pay that is a living wage, heaven forbid. Where's my fainting couch? Sove continues, you better believe Jeff Bezos is going to get involved in politics. It's true of Apple. It's true of Google. You bet it's true of Elon Musk. I should also point out to Robbie Sove and the right that should also include George Soros, right? They always leave out George Soros when it comes to touting the influence of the uber wealthy on politics when it benefits the right. But boy, they love to Soros backed. Soros is paying activists. I've been to a lot of rallies. I ain't never got the first damn George Soros check. Robbie continues, and it's not just wealthy individuals, activist groups such as teachers' unions who spend millions of dollars to help elect Democrats because they think Democrats do a better job protecting their jobs, wages, and summer vacations. Yes, through a union, sir, which those embattled teachers have to join in order to even have something even close to equal footing with one human being who could cut a 9-figure check to a presidential campaign. It's almost like Robbie gets it. It's almost like Robbie gets it, but Robbie doesn't get it. Back after this, it's the Ron Show, America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
So we've been talking a good bit the first half of the show, a little bit about the Joe Rogan, Bernie Sanders experience on the Joe Rogan podcast earlier this week, and the Zohran Mamdani race and the effects that that's having on power brokers in New York City. And not just the check writers, but actual Democrats who are like either super excited about his primary win in the New York City mayoral race or are super concerned that, oh my God, they're going to think we're all Democratic socialists. Eek! The Scandinavians just have to be laughing off in the distance, right? With their first world societies and their higher standard of living and higher quality of life and life expectancies and all that good stuff the only thing that Scandinavians have that I don't want, the weather. I mean, God, if the Scandinavians somehow wound up with a Caribbean province, the Canadians, if they had a Caribbean territory, shoot. You don't think Americans would be expatriating? Please. It's already happening in other countries as it is. I watched this clip the other day where this retired couple was, hang on, let me find this. This retired couple realized, hell, I've got clients. I'm a realtor in Atlanta. I've got clients that are moving to Spain. They're moving to Valencia later this year. I'm helping to sell their condo. By the way, a fantastic condo in Midtown Atlanta for under $300,000 in like this bubble of a quiet spot. You don't hear the city. Hit me up, Ron at rononthereal.com. But let me play a clip for you. This couple, I think this was on CBS Sunday Morning, either last Sunday or a recent Sunday. This couple's moving to Spain and are living off their Social Security income and are going to be able to do so quite comfortably. And by the way, let me correct myself now that I've pulled this video up. This is Mary Charlebois and Kevin Scanlon, who have moved to Malta, which is an island near Sicily off the coast of North Africa. It's beautiful, by the way.
We would never have been able to stop working. We couldn't live on our Social Security, and that's really what we both wanted. Right. And here, we do it easily, and we have a good standard of life here. Much better, actually.
Their rent, for starters, is $750 a month.
One of the things you wanted was a view.
A view,
Definitely. Yeah. And you got it.
We got it.
They were able to get rid of their car, and they say groceries cost half what they did in the U.S.
Kismet.
Yeah.
Rental income from their California house helps the couple qualify for a visa.
What about health care? What if either of you got really sick? Would you want to go back to the U.S.?
No. I was in the hospital a couple of days here. Part of our residency is that we have to carry private insurance, which is less expensive than Medicare charges, and it pays 100%.
And the quality of care?
It was great.
I think it has never been easier to retire overseas.
Jennifer Stevens is executive editor of International Living, a publication which offers advice and seminars for those considering living or retiring abroad.
You really can live well on a Social Security check in a lot of these places and live at a level of comfort that you would be hard-pressed to enjoy in the U.S. on the same budget.
Wow. And by the way, that is money that is going to another country's economy altogether now, will not be U.S. economic fodder. That is not good for this country, right? All right, I got off topic just a little bit. Let me take you back to the Sanders-Rogan conversation. the one that like I'm not seeing nearly enough traction on, and I'm wondering why in this corporate media where the how does Bernie say his name? Elon Musk and the Zuckerbergs, et cetera, and so on. The corporate-owned entity. Like, why is this not leading news? You would think that like a rabid Trump supporter and a diehard progressive agreeing on something so major would be headline news. Oh, it's the minimum wage. Well, that doesn't benefit Elon. That doesn't benefit, Jeff Bezos or the Amazons of the world that Robbie Swove likes to glom on about.
I think the minimum wage in this country is ridiculous. I mean, to $7.
Preach, baby.
What?
It's insane.
It's insane. How do you live off $7? You go to Jimmy John's, you get a sub. How much is a sub? How much is a sub, like a big sub at Jimmy John's? Some guy was just did a TikTok video where he's like, they're trying to say that minimum wage $15 is too much. I think he had a sub that he bought for $25.
Wow.
So imagine that's your lunch. So imagine you have to work 3.5 hours just to pay for a sandwich. Imagine how insane that is.
It's insane.
That's insane. Like, how do you eat? How do you eat dinner? How do you eat lunch?
Joe,
how do you eat breakfast?
I have talked to people who make $10-12 an hour trying to raise a kid.
Jesus.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, the argument against that is, hey, these are entry-level jobs that are supposed to be for kids.
No, and that's factually incorrect. Yeah, of course, it's true to some degree.
But if you have grown adults that are working those jobs, now it becomes disgusting.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Especially when you're dealing with an enormous corporation.
You got it.
Right.
Whoa.
So we put a lot of pressure. We are trying to raise the minimum wage, federal minimum wage, to $17 an hour. That's
a reasonable amount of money. I mean, it's going to be real difficult to live off of $17 an hour.
But at least that's right.
At least you can get a sandwich in under 2 hours worth of work.
And let me remind the Robbie Soves of the world that without the minimum wage, businesses would, if they could, pay people less. Hell, they're doing it. They are doing it. Why do you think we have such an issue when it comes to illegal hiring of immigrants, of undocumented immigrants? Hello? Workplace conditions that businesses don't want to pay to keep up with because of federal regulation. They're skirting those laws, right? Yeah. With underpaid employees who aren't here legally. Yeah, Robbie, his premise, however, is if you don't like how much money is spent in politics, then the best solution, in my view, is to make politics matter less. But the lessening of government and regulation on our society is, in large part, the source of a lot of the problems. He said if the government had less power, it wouldn't be worth spending so much to control it. He just wants us to concede it to the wealthy. Again, that is a typical white, male, heterosexual, libertarian view. I don't have any problems with the way things are. Things seem to work really well for me. I don't need government. ... As much as my female counterpart, my African-American counterpart, my Hispanic-born female counterpart, my LGBTQIA plus counterpart. No, I guess you don't. It's a white privilege to be a libertarian. I've said that many times. I will say this now, and the caveat being, the libertarian presidential candidate, who, by the way, was on this show last cycle, is a gay male, but he's a white male. So, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Yeah, Robbie Sove didn't talk about this part of the Bernie Sanders conversation with the venerable, the vaunted Joe Rogan. Gee, why is that? Let's go back to the Mamdani situation in New York, where, again, money and politics influence who you know, how much money they got. Privately, a range of interest groups on Wednesday were meeting to consider their options. At 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, the Partnership for New York City, a big business group, held a meeting for a subset of its members to discuss the new political landscape. In separate discussions, some business leaders even consulted election lawyers to see if there was a way to replace Andrew Cuomo on the ballot. Should he not run in the general election as an independent? 3 people familiar with the conversation said. As potential replacements, they discussed Edward Schuyler, who worked as a deputy mayor for Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire, and is now a senior executive at Citigroup, a man of the people. And Jessica Tisch, the police commissioner, the people said. Mr. Schuyler left the Republican Party to become an independent earlier this year, and Ms. Tisch is a Democrat. But Jerry Goldfelder, a state election law expert, said that was unlikely to be a legal possibility. But the power brokers, the big check writers, said that they want to try. Can we not? Do we not have somebody we could reach out to in Albany, New York, to make this happen? The story continues. Mr. Mamdani's success may also have implications for Governor Kathy Hochul, who is set up for re-election next year and already faces one Democratic challenger. Republicans considering running against her, including Representative Michael Lawler from the Hudson Valley, are already trying to tie Ms. Hochul to Mr. Mamdani's policy agenda. He quickly elevated himself to the leading voice in the Democratic Party. Oh, my God. The guy is not even the mayor of New York yet. He is a winner of a primary for the mayorship of New York, and he's already now the leading voice of the Democratic Party. Hyperbolic. I said this after that election night the next morning. This is hyperbolic-ish. They're already out to make him something he's not even yet won ascendancy to. Leading voice in the Democratic Party. And now they're all going to have to figure out how they respond to it, Lawler said. Do they agree with him? Do they embrace him? That's the thing about the Democratic Party. We don't agree with each other in lockstep 1,000% of the time. We don't. Hell, Republicans don't either. They can't even get the big, beautiful bill passed. They can't agree on everything themselves. Iran, bombing Iran. Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't for it. They don't agree on everything. We don't either. And this trying to portray Democrats as all being 1,000% in lockstep with something that they think is a crazy policy, or it's just political posturing. Back to the article. Before the primary, Governor Hochul stressed that she would work with whoever was the next mayor, emphasizing that a constructive relationship between the two offices would be in New Yorkers' best interest. Boy, would that be nice to hear all the time here in Georgia between the governor's office and the city of Atlanta. I mean, it is right now because they're both fairly well aligned. This goes back to my question about Mamdani's results. What will it do with Atlanta's mayoral race, if anything? I think the qualification for that is August 21st. Clock's ticking. 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Is anybody going to step up? Because right now we just have moneyed interest running for re-election. But in a television interview over the weekend, Governor Hochul said that Mr. Mamdani's desire to levy billions in new taxes on the city's wealthiest individuals and corporations, which would require state approval, were non-starters with her. I'm not raising taxes on people at a time when affordability is the big issue. Affordability is not an issue for the people he wants to raise taxes on, Governor. Oh, my God. I don't want to lose any more people to go to Palm Beach. We've lost enough. Who can afford to go to Palm Beach that lives in New York City? Rich people. Goes back to the problem that I think Democrats have to deal with. They're beholden to the wallet. Less so than the people. Back after this. Final segment of the Ron Show. I want to take you back to a conversation I had last week. In fact, it was a week ago today with the Executive Vice President of Policy at Third Way Democrats. That's the moderate centrist Democratic organization. Jim Kessler said this.
When you get to who is loudest, and I don't mean loudest in a rude way, but who gets paid most attention to by the media, on social media, etc., it is definitely the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Now, I don't blame them for that.
I'm going to disagree with you, but go ahead.
They are Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC. They get noticed much more, in part because, in some ways, people find them more compelling. So the challenge for Democrats is...
Yes, they do.
Well,
hello?
They do, but I have a colleague who says this, that says progressives win every single day except election day.
See, and that's in large part, I believe, because the vote blue, no matter who, people on the center or the moderate side of the party, they don't vote blue no matter who, when the who is a progressive. It doesn't work. It doesn't seem to work both ways. That's a big problem for me. And he also made some comments about how, progressives tend to caricaturize the center, which is ironic because that's exactly what the center does to progressives. Back to Jim Kessler and I last Friday. I think it's, again, low-hanging fruit. You can win those voters over without alienating your attempt to win over the center. But I don't think Democrats are even trying.
Well, if you're a centrist, you do feel like the progressives attack you all the time and basically say you're corporatists and you're whores and shills and immoral.
And you could go the other way. You could. I think both sides could say the same thing. And so here we are now, a week later, and we see the Mamdani results, and New York and even national Republicans are like, don't know how to. He won the primary. Support him. He's your Democratic nominee. Support him, right? Vote blue no matter who. That's what we're doing. Vote blue no matter who. Right? Right? I want to turn the page real quick while I've got just a few more minutes. Patricia Murphy at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution yesterday filed a story focusing on AIPAC, the pro-Israeli political action committee that is on the attack at Senator John Ossoff, a Jewish American. And there seems to be some divide amongst Jewish American Georgians, Democrats even. Representative Esther Panich here? To me, I used to follow her. I had to stop. It just got crazy. It really did. It got crazy. I have a neighbor. I love Oren to death. He and I were like literally next door neighbors. We still live on the same floor. He's a great guy. He is an Israeli born. Everything he posts on social media, it's all from a pro-Israeli skew. Israel can do no wrong. The Palestinians are all to blame. I can't engage with people like that. The same way I can't engage after an Alabama-Georgia football game. Alabama can do no wrong. Saban is the greatest. He's the GOAT. You can't have a coaching conversation with someone about the nuances of the way a game actually went when both teams had their foibles or whatever. If officiating is a problem, you can't have a coaching conversation on a game with someone so embedded with their team, such a fanatic. You just can't. And AIPAC is definitely that. This is why I appreciate John Ossoff so much. I think he's very measured. And that's the problem with AIPAC and John Ossoff right now. Back to Murphy. When John Ossoff ran for Senate in 2020, he and Raphael Warnock asked voters to think about the history they could be making by electing Georgia's first Jewish senator and first black senator at the same time. But now he's in the Senate and up for re-election next year. Ossoff is living through the kind of history unfolding at such breakneck speed, it's hard to keep up. President Trump is back in the White House. Israel is at war with Iran, and the United States dropped a massive payload of bombs on Iran, something that may or may not bring retaliation to U.S. soil. Okay, Murphy, you need to edit that. Against the backdrop, and with Congress largely sidelined by the Trump administration, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, sent a blistering email to Jewish supporters last week with the subject, John Ossoff is failing our community. She writes, the powerful pro-Israel group ripped Ossoff, who was on paternity leave at the time, for not releasing a public statement supporting Israel for nearly a week after the Israel-Iran war began. This is simply unacceptable, wrote Darren Kendall, the regional political director for AIPAC in Washington. Frustration and even anger toward Ossoff was bubbling over among some Jewish Georgians, too. What good was it to have a Jewish senator if he didn't speak out in moments like this? She writes, he doesn't seem to understand that he has constituents that need him and need leadership, said State Representative Esther Panich, the Democrat from Dunwoody, who's the only Jewish member in the Georgia legislature. What we're missing is leadership. It's falling to me, and it shouldn't, she said. I have no ability to influence foreign policy. I would like him to be more communicative to one of the primary communities who put him there. Murphy's piece continues. Joshua Heller of Congregation B'nai Torah in Sandy Springs called last week's events incredibly distressing, particularly since the rabbi's own daughter and sister were both in Israel when the conflict began. I was disappointed personally and certainly as a leader. I would have liked for him not to have waited so many days to say something. Just a public statement of support to know that Israel is able to defend itself. I mean, they are able to defend themselves whether the senator says something or not. He's on paternity leave, for crying out loud. About an hour after the AIPAC email landed in Georgia's inboxes last Friday, an email from Ossoff came too with an update on the Middle East. He said, over the past week, as I have enjoyed moments at home with my newborn baby daughter and young Jewish family, I thought often of those huddled in shelters across Israel without the same security. Ossoff detailed the funding for Israel defense he had supported recently and said the national security of the United States was his highest priority. Also said he'd been in touch with Georgians with family in the area and shared his office number for people looking to reach his staff. And then, by the way, remember, folks, he's on paternity leave. Can he not? That was enough for Larry Auerbach, a retired lawyer in Atlanta who said he was offended by AIPAC's email, not the timing of Ossoff's. I'm not a spokesman for the Jewish community, but I do know a lot of people, and I literally don't know people who are not happy with a senator, except possibly my cousin's widow, Larry says, and we don't talk about politics. AIPAC, on the other hand, quote, is political, he said. It's not the Jewish community. Likewise, Rabbi Michael Rothbaum called the email from AIPAC shameful. This is about the primacy of life and the value of human life, which is not disposable or expendable. And these are the things that I've seen the senators stand for, and these are the things that millions of Jews stand for. Them questioning our loyalty, questioning our commitment to Jewish safety is grotesque. Like all of the people Patricia Murphy says she spoke with, Dr. Michael Greenwald, a pediatric emergency doctor from Dunwoody, was deeply troubled by the idea of Iran having access to nuclear weapons. But he also said Ossoff's approach to Israel over time has been the right one. Hello, AIPAC, are you listening? He has weighed the situation, not jumped in and acted like he's at a pep rally ready to stand up and applaud no matter what, but has to think about things and weigh the situation. And that's exactly what I think our founders intended for our Senate. That Dr. Michael Greenwald, a pediatric emergency doctor from Dunwoody. Beth Sugarman said she was horrified when the United States began bombing Iran and worries that it won't be, quote, the grand finale Trump predicted. She said, and I think it didn't bother me that there wasn't a message from Senator Ossoff for a few days because he's very thoughtful. Well, AIPAC cannot like to read stuff like this. Murphy's column continues. The clash between Ossoff and AIPAC is not a first. After the senator voted in 2024 to block some arms sales to Israel, the bipartisan group blasted him then too. A meeting between AIPAC members and Ossoff this spring was, quote, very frank and, quote, extremely tense, according to 3 people who attended the meeting. They also said he's not a rubber stamp for them enough. Ah! They also said a follow-up vote from Ossoff to allow additional arms sales to Israel seemed to satisfy the group until now. A spokesman from AIPAC would not discuss the most recent email about Ossoff, suggesting we wait until, quote, later in the campaign cycle. Well, that's a veiled threat, foreboding, right? And that's the part that Jewish Georgians have long feared, that support for Israel and even for Jewish people could become a wedge issue and once politicized, repel as many Americans as it attracts. And I would say to AIPAC, yes, that's the problem. You're the problem, not Senator Ossoff. His measured approach, his putting his family ahead of releasing an innocuous statement that wouldn't change what the president's going to do one way or the other. Patricia writes, again, this is where Democrats are involved, but expect Republicans running for Senate against Ossoff in 2026 to do more than use Israel as a wedge issue. Look for them to say Ossoff's handling of the conflict, thoughtful or overly cautious, depending on who you ask, reveals him as unfit to serve. Ossoff has been very distant and weak, said John King, the Georgia insurance commissioner who is running for Senate and who served in the Army National Guard in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I believe who is not a Jewish person. I think Americans and Georgians deserve clarity, not a political doublespeak that looks like a Harvard term paper. Sorry, Mr. King, but complex issues do require complex responses, even if you don't understand them, because they read like a Harvard term paper. Panitch, the Democratic representative, said people shouldn't assume complaints about Ossoff will necessarily translate into Republican votes if people agree with the Democrats on abortion, health care, and other issues. But for her and everybody Patricia Murphy said she spoke with, the current threats against Israel and even Jews themselves is about more than politics. It's existential. She said, Jews are being hunted in the streets in D.C., in Colorado, in the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. If Jewish issues were not front and center, then I understand you don't have to weigh in on everything. But when they are, we expect you to weigh in and to lead. I'm telling you, running for office as a Democrat is like herding cats because you're not going to get everyone in the same direction at the same time. I actually think that John Ossoff's measured approach as a Jewish American senator is leadership, Representative Panitch, because what he's doing is he's showing that, yes, there is a portion of him that understands the marginalization, but there's also the rest of him that understands the bigger picture as well. And do we not need more of that? Do we not need to see less white nationalism from white male libertarian-leaning conservatives and more, maybe see the bigger picture? Hello? Am I the only one that thinks that this is actually a good thing? That we should see more of that? I mean, that's what Democrats are for all along. Like, we're always harping on white male, stale, pale male, Melita Easters calls stale, pale males who are always thinking from their conservative point of view without thinking of other communities. That's what we want in leadership. Thank you, Senator John Ossoff, for showing us that that can be done. More of it, please. That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. The show airs weekdays, 9 a.m., 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn and wherever you podcast. Show notes, as always, at ronshowetl.com. We also air a weekend edition of this show at 10 a.m. Saturdays and Sundays. Progressive Voices via TuneIn. All right. Have yourselves a great weekend. Back here Monday at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Take care.